Welcome to the Bible and Science. This is Dave Prentice. I'm a retired public high school teacher, certified in all branches of science and math. I've also taught on the Bible and Science for many years, both in the U.S. and on many overseas mission trips. This is episode 45 of the Bible and Science, and it has to do with the question of whether mammals came from reptiles. Now let me backtrack quite a bit. The point of everything that I've been talking about, the podcast is called The Bible and Science. It's dedicated to the proposition that the Bible is correct in all areas, including the scientifically testable statements it makes. Many things are not scientifically testable, prophecies about the future and so forth. But the scientifically testables, the ones I'm focusing on more than anything else, have to do with the Bible's statements from Genesis chapter 1 that things reproduce only after their kind. Now, by contrast, evolution says that living things began in a disorganized, relatively simple condition. They've evolved into vastly different types. So this requires them to have developed a great increase in organization and complexity, that is, much more genetic information. So I've been dealing with the fossil record and hoping that you see that it doesn't show evolutionary trends from non-life to life, from single-celled to multi-celled, from unknown multi-celled organisms to invertebrates, from invertebrates to vertebrates, from fish to land animals, that is amphibians, from amphibians to reptiles, from reptiles to birds, from one type of reptiles to another. Okay, well, you and I are mammals. We're classified as mammals. So the topic we're getting into is, do the fossils show that reptiles evolved into mammals? There's a statement attributed to the late Carl Sagan. He said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, I would disagree. For instance, the claim that Jesus rose from the dead. Do we need extraordinary evidence? No. Eyewitnesses, empty tomb. That's ordinary evidence. You could also falsify it by ordinary evidence. The Romans said he didn't rise from the dead. Well, what you could do is just bring people in and show the body. That's ordinary evidence. But anyway, the extraordinary claim is that some early fish evolved into amphibians. The descendants evolved into reptiles. They evolved into mammals. They evolved all the way up to us. So what's the evidence? Extraordinary evidence? None. We have many tiny fossilized fragments, mainly of teeth and jaws, but we don't have a complete fossil of even one of the alleged transitions, not even one complete fossil. We have little pieces, but not a single one. So the claim is that mammals evolved from some type of reptiles, such as mammal-like Pelycosaurs, therapsids, and cynodonts. The ordinary evidence, looking at fossils, we have extremely large numbers of reptile fossils, including mammal-like types. For instance, one estimate says that the Karoo Formation of South Africa, where I've been, has billions of vertebrate fossils, and many are Permian reptiles. Also, or various places around the world, there are a great many fossils of mammals. So, what is the evidence of transitions? We don't have a single fossil of a transitional form showing an intermediate stage, a complete body fossil, or even large portions of it from reptiles to mammals, or from any major group to any other major group. Now think back, where are reptiles and mammals on the geologic time scale? Well, the mammals, of course, includes us, and they're supposed to go back from us all the way to the probably Middle Jurassic period. The first thing that's claimed to be a mammal is Brachyllodon, and that's dated about 225 million years ago. And I don't accept these ages, but as I've said repeatedly, even if you accept the ages, you still don't see evolution in the fossil record. So after those are supposed to be a transitional group called Morganucodonts. And where did all of these come from? Supposedly, they were some rather primitive type mammal type reptiles, but this is, according to the evolutionary timescale, this is millions of years before dinosaurs came along. Dinosaurs are not considered the most highly evolved reptiles. That would be the so-called mammal-like reptiles, such as the cynodonts, the therapsids, and the pelycosaurs. So the sequence is just wrong. You would expect the most advanced reptiles to be there shortly before the mammals. No, that's not the case. Mammals actually appear after the supposed most advanced reptiles, but mammals appear along with the earliest dinosaurs. Why would this happen? You'll occasionally read about a ghost lineage. The ghost lineage term is applied when there's no fossil evidence for ancestors, but we decided, or somebody decided, it must have existed despite the lack of evidence. For instance, according to the evolutionary timescale, the first definitive mammalian middle ear is found in a type called Hadrocodium. It's dated about 195 million years ago. However, the mammal that's claimed to be the oldest, which is Brasilodon, it's dated to about 225 million years ago, which is 30 million years before the first definitive mammalian middle ear. So if they both came from some ancestral stock, there must have been a ghost lineage leading to Hadrocodium that survived for 30 million years without leaving any fossils. Or, here's another possibility, different groups of mammals evolved from reptiles independently several times. And as we go through this, I would hope you're going to see that that's ridiculous. There would have to be such a complex type of evolution to produce mammals even one time. But then the alternative is, oh, no, things didn't evolve. Those strata don't represent time periods. They represent ecological communities. Now, here's another term you may see sometimes. It's called a Lazarus taxon. That's something that disappears from the fossil record and then reappears supposedly much later, that is, at a higher level. A good example of that is the coelacanth. It's a fish that's found off the coast of Madagascar that supposedly dated from the time of the dinosaurs, and then we didn't have any fossils of it, but then, oh, no, they're still swimming around today. So those are called Lazarus. But you'd have to have a lot of ghost lineages. For instance, Hadrocodium is supposedly the first definitive mammalian ear, middle ear, and it's a little bitty thing. Its skull was like the size of a paperclip or so. But it's supposed to be the first definitive mammalian middle ear, DMME. Now, when I'm talking about reptiles and mammals, there are four major types of skulls you're going to find in land animals, and they're classified according to the number of openings behind the eye. The anapsids would be things like turtles and so forth. The synapsids have one opening behind and below the eye. That's where the ears go. So mammals and mammal-like reptiles, so-called mammal-like reptiles, are called synapsids. Then you also had the diapsids, which was some things like the dinosaurs, and euryapsids, which included some marine reptiles. But supposedly the first anapsid DNA evolved to produce no openings, and then mutations occurred and produced one opening in the synapsids, and then two openings in the diapsids, and then later the DNA is supposed to have mutated again so that one of the openings that had been gained through mutations disappeared. Okay, this is all supposed to be random evolution of the DNA apart from any design on the part of God. Okay, so considering where mammals might have come from, The group that's considered to be the lowest of the mammal-like reptiles. You would think the mammal-like reptiles would be the most advanced because mammals are believed more advanced than reptiles in general. Okay, so the lowest of the mammal-like reptiles, which is way out of sequence on the evolutionary timescale, is called Pelycosaurs. They were a subgroup of synapsids that had legs splayed out to the side, and you frequently still hear them called mammal-like reptiles. They had some features similar to those of mammals: tooth arrangement, lower jaw structure, number of openings in the jaws and the skull. That's the lower jaw, not the upper jaw. These are considered relatives but not ancestors of mammals. So where did they come from? Well, we don't know. There are no transitions connecting them to any other type of reptiles, earlier reptiles, later reptiles, and there are also no known transitions connecting them to mammals. So over there you'll see some Adaphosauruses and Ophiocodons and Paraeosauruses and Bradysaurus. I was in South Africa and there's Bradysauruses all over the place in the Karoo Formation. So I wonder if you remember the old TV show, The Brady Bunch. Well, there's the Bradysaurus bunch in South Africa. The next group in line after the Pelycosaurs would be the therapsids, and they're supposedly evolving upward toward more and more advanced types of creatures. There were different subgroup of synapsids, remember, based on the skull openings. They had legs directly underneath their body, and they're alleged to be the ancestors of mammals, even though we don't have any specific transitions. All of the non-mammalian therapsids disappeared around the beginning of the Cretaceous. So there are some very common forms over in South Africa and places like that, mainly in the Permian: Diictodon, Lycaenops, Cynocanamaria. That's a great name. Try to say that 10 times in a row. That one's found in China. So anyway, these things are all over the place. As I said, we don't have a complete fossil of transitions. We do have complete fossils of many of the final forms, the terminal forms. So when you're gradually moving up toward evolving mammals, you started out with the other ones and then came to the therapsids, and now we're in a group called non-mammalian cynodonts. Now, if I were doing the classifying, I would think that a key feature would be the method of breeding, the warm-bloodedness, whether they nurse or have hair or something like that. But nope, the evolutionists were looking for something that they could use to tie all of the living things together. And so they said, let's go with the arrangement of teeth. Well, there was a bunch of reptiles, such as the gorgonians, that have a typical reptilian arrangement where all the teeth are basically the same. But then mammals have teeth, most of us, like dogs do, except some don't have teeth at all, not just old people, but stuff like the platypus. But these are called cynodonts. It means dog teeth. Remember, the synapsids have one opening on each side of the skull behind the eyes, and those that are doing the classification place both mammals and reptiles in this group. The therapsids, that I mentioned a few minutes ago, are a subgroup of synapsids with legs directly underneath the body. And then we get the cynodonts, which is another subgroup, a subgroup of the therapsids. They're classified that way because they have dog-like teeth, which are typical of mammals. And these contrast to many of the reptiles that have all the same type of teeth. They don't have the molars and the premolars and the incisors and so forth. So the cynodonts include mammals as well as some extinct types of reptiles. So there's a Cynognathus and a Procynosuchus. Those are cynodonts, but they're non-mammalian cynodonts. Well, I would call them a reptile. But those that want to tie everything together and say we all evolved together are going to call them non-mammalian cynodonts. And the mammals, of course, are mammalian cynodonts. So where did the mammals come from? According to evolution, they appeared suddenly and explosively. Scientists can tell the difference between reptiles and mammals and between different types of mammals by their bone structure. There are no mammals known from any strata lower than the Triassic. In the Triassic, there are a few. They're called stem mammals. They represent 5 orders. They're found in the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. But there's no visible evolutionary development of the fossils from the lower to the upper strata. But then the other 27 or so orders of mammals appear suddenly in the lower Paleogene. So if you look at the geologic timescale, evolutionary timescale, you see Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous have a few mammals that represent 5 orders. But then when you get to the Paleogene, which would be Paleocene, Eocene, and so forth, wow, you have 27 more orders of mammals. Now, when I say 27, the reason is that different people do classification differently, and some will divide the mammals into 32 orders or something like that. But, when I say 27 more, that's commonly accepted. So initial disorganization, evolution, says the extra orders evolved by natural selection operating on minor mutations. Initial complexity, creation, says these were not new orders, but they were existing ones that had previously not been buried and fossilized. So I guess this would be sort of like thinking of a ghost lineage, but not over millions and millions and millions of years, just from pre-flood day to post-flood. So here are the mammals that are not disputed, and they're found in the Mesozoic. In the Jurassic, you had a bunch of them. Some of them were found in both the Jurassic and then the Upper Cretaceous, and then some were found in the Upper Jurassic, some were found in the Lower Cretaceous. So now if you want, I can give you a test on all of these. No, I'm not going to do that. But they all appear suddenly and fully formed with no known ancestry. Oh, there they are. And then these are, as far as we know, all extinct. They disappear from the fossil record without leaving any connection to any earlier types or later types, living reptiles and mammals. So let's go to the modern mammals. There are 3 major groups. They're divided into over 30 orders, depending on who's doing the classification. And they're placed in 3 major categories according to their method of reproduction. The monotremes are the ones like the platypus. If you ever watch Phineas and Ferb, you'll know Perry the platypus. Monotremes have only one opening for reproductive and excretory functions. They lay leathery eggs, and they hatch after about 10 days. The babies go through most of their embryonic development after hatching. They can't survive on their own, but they remain in a nest, and then they nurse for several months. Monotremes don't have teats. Instead, the babies lick milk off a mammary patch on the mother's abdomen inside of the pouch. Sorry, they don't have pouches. Monotremes don't have stomachs. They digest nutrients directly from their intestines. And they're classified as cynodonts, which means dog teeth, but, well, some of them never have teeth anyway. Echidnas, spiny anteaters, never have teeth. But the rest of their skeleton is obviously mammalian, so they're classified as mammals. And likewise, the platypuses, they start out with teeth, but they lose their teeth after infancy. The platypus is a weird creature. It has webbed forefeet, it has clawed hind feet, a beaver-like tail, it has a leather bill that looks like a duck bill, but it has electric sensors that allow it to detect small prey in the mud. It's feeling for the electric signals from the little shrimp and so forth. And then, this is kind of strange, males have spurs on their hind feet attached to poison glands. So if you get a platypus as a pet, like Phineas and Ferb, be careful for those hind feet. Hind feet, they're poisonous. Here's another group of undisputed modern mammals, marsupials. These are the pouched animals. They give birth to very immature babies, and these crawl back into a pouch on the front of the mother. They latch onto a teat until they're mature enough to emerge several months later. There are about 250 known living and fossil species of marsupials. The method of reproduction is vastly different from the placental mammals that I'll talk about in a minute. Many marsupials have close equivalents among non-marsupial animals. For instance, kangaroos are very similar to deer except for the legs. The sugar gliders are very similar to flying squirrels, but they're not squirrels. Wombats are similar to groundhogs. Tasmanian devils are like wolverines. Quolls are like cats. They're also marsupial equivalents of mice, rats, wolves. Rhinoceroses? Ah, yeah. And panthers. Now, if you've ever seen an opossum, that's the only marsupial that's generally found at various other places around the world except for Australia. It's virtually unchanged from fossil specimens that date to about 65 million years ago. So why are there these similarities between marsupials and non-marsupials? Those that reject the possibility that maybe there's a God that designed all of this, they're going to have to attribute the similarities to parallel evolution caused by millions and millions of beneficial mutations in DNA. And then the third group, which is the vast majority of the modern mammals, are called placentals or eutherials. They have a placenta which connects the babies to the mother, and as all the rest of them complete their embryonic development, they're nourished inside the mother's womb by a well-developed placenta. Now, marsupials do depend on a placenta for a short time, but they're not classified as placentals because the duration is short. There are dozens of types of living placentals, including rodents, bats, shrews, moles, and moles are not rodents. Hedgehogs, also not rodents. Lagomorphs, which is hares and rapids, also not rodents. Whales, dolphins, primates, humans, and yeah, humans. You can look in the middle of the page and see a picture of Bigfoot. Also, there are odd-toed hoofed animals, even-toed hoofed animals, elephants, manatees, aardvarks, carnivores, and so forth. All of these are supposed to have evolved from the same non-mammalian cynodont ancestor, some sort of a reptile that was evolving toward a mammal. Well, we're going to shortly see one of the obvious differences, which is going to be the mechanism in the jaws and in the ears. So marsupials, monostremes, and several extinct orders are supposed to have developed the same jaw and middle ear structure as placentals at least 3 separate times by mutations in DNA that are independent of but parallel to the mutations in the placentals. One of the main characteristics that we can use to determine whether something is a reptile or a mammal is its jaw structure. In order to evolve from a reptilian, shown on the left, to a mammalian jaw structure, there would have had to be intermediate stages with a double jaw articulation. Okay, on the left is a non-mammalian amniote, that is a reptile. On the right is supposed to be an early mammal. Okay, and you can see the number of bones on the left side in the jaw. There are 3 in the lower jaw on each side and only one in the middle ear, where with mammals instead, you have one bone in the jaw and three in the inner ear. So in order for reptilians to evolve into mammalian hearing, the bones would have to go through some amazing changes. They would have to develop from a partial mammalian middle ear, PMME, and then a transitional mammalian middle ear, finally ended with a definitive mammalian middle ear. So all reptiles have got a middle ear that's like each other, except during development of marsupials and monotremes, there's a little bit of a gradual change, but in mammal, and they wind up with the same type of middle ears that you see in the rest of the mammals. So two bones, the angular and articular, if they're evolving from reptile to mammal, would have to migrate to the other side of the eardrum and also move from the lower to the upper jaw. Wow, how are they going to hear? They probably wouldn't have been able to hear at all. So we're going to talk a little bit later on about the hypothetical transition that would have had to take place in order to go from some sort of a reptilian, that is non-mammalian cynodont, to the mammalian middle ears. So you have to decide, is this something that it seems to me like it's reasonable that would have happened by millions or at least thousands of mutations in the DNA of each of the ancestral lines? I would hope that you would look at this with an unprejudiced eye and say, no, that just doesn't work. I don't have any sort of a hidden agenda. I started out as somebody that didn't believe the Bible, and I became a Bible-believing Christian. And my goal, my agenda is to help other people in their faith in the Bible as the Word of God, and lead you and whoever happens to listen to saving faith in Jesus Christ. So we'll continue on talking about reptiles and mammals in the next episode, but remember, that's my goal, is to lead you to faith in God through Jesus Christ.